got to talk about mainstream media today and how they are trying to save face. And the main culprits of today's video are going to be Chuck Todd and Chris Cillizza. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm sure I'm butchering his last name. But yeah, with that being said, I'm not going to waste too much time. Let's hop right on into this first clip with Chuck Todd and Steve Schmidt. Let's dive in.
Democratic Party did exactly.
I'll give you a story that I got raked over the coals on when I told this story about 6 months ago. I had a cabinet secretary, very off the record cabinet secretary, right after the 22 midterms, ask me this question: how can Biden run again? Okay, this is a pretty high level. This cabinet secretary could never get a one-on-one in the Oval Office. Felt as if they were being prevented. This was not, no offense to HUD and labor, but this person wasn't at HUD and labor. And I'll just leave it at that. This is one of the big five. And they couldn't get a one-on-one meeting with her. I believe Blinken was the only one that ever got real one-on-one meetings. I don't think anybody else did. And it's because Blinken was in on it. And what do I mean by in on it? You know, this is where I'm going to defend the press a little bit here, because I would argue, why did the country conclude that Biden was too old to be president? Because of what they saw based on the coverage we were giving. So, for instance, while we had Baghdad Bob-like spokespeople inside that West Wing about Biden, oh, he's never been better, he's never been this. You know, it was us in the press who said, hey, look, he's taking the short staircase. It was us in the press that said, hey, he's only doing one event a day.
Well, in fairness, you got a former colleague of yours looked in the camera and told the audience, F you, if you don't believe this is the best version.
And this is why I'm not going to sit there and defend that. Right. There was a lot of what I call the partisan, the ideologic. Look, the people that are on cable news.
But you should. The media should.
But my argument is that the reason the public had concluded Biden was too old was based on their own observations. Well, how were they observing this? Well, we were the filter. So I'm not sitting here defending what many of my idiot colleagues would say, because I would sit there and say, how come, I couldn't get Joe Biden on Meet the Press. The last time I had Joe Biden on Meet the Press was May of 2020 in his basement. I never got him again. That wasn't an accident. They weren't going to put him on with anybody that was going to do a follow-up question, because they were panicked, right? It was obvious. Now, the question was, the fair critique of me in this could be, should I have been more public in complaining about the lack of access to him?
No, what you should have been more public about is, one, the fact that he was in his basement and that it was completely obvious. These are his words. It was obvious what was happening. They were trying to hide this man. And people like yourself, Chuck Todd, carried the water for him. You covered for it. People on your own network, I believe he worked for MSDNC, Joe Scarborough, and F you if you don't believe this is the best version of Joe Biden. Excuse me? Really? You gonna insult my intelligence like that? The interview with Karine Jean-Pierre and Don Lemon aired on national television. Is Joe Biden good? Is he okay? Of course he's fine. He's my mentor. Mainstream media aired those interviews. Alejandro Mayorkas, or whatever the guy's name is, what did he say? The hardest thing about meeting with Joe Biden is preparing for the meeting because he's detail oriented. Mainstream media was airing these interviews as if they were completely facts or completely true. Like, no digging in, like, well, why was he wandering off like a lost puppy? Why did Obama have to guide him off the stage? If he's all there, why is this happening? Nobody cared to ask? Nobody?
This is not a media failure. This is a failure of the Democratic Party. And I just sort of the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. No. David Ignatius wrote, I just refuse to accept this stupid premise because it's a right-wing, manufactured right-wing premise in order to stain the media. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for. And there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden, but they're not journalists. They're former strategists that carried water for Joe Biden. The journalist, David Ignatius, wrote a very high-profile column in October of 23 saying, is he really running again? This doesn't seem like a good idea. People like me were promoting Dean Phillips's campaign because he was running
Wall Street Journal did a bunch of coverage.
Sense. So it's not like this. This isn't WMDs where the White House worked with the mainstream media to manufacture a story that did not exist. That was a press failure, massive press failure. This was not that failure. This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other, when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
Wait a minute. So it's Chuck Schumer's fault, Nancy Pelosi's fault, and Joe Biden's fault. But it's not mainstream media's fault. It's not the people who are there to report the news, to dig into the stories and figure out the facts. It's not your fault. You see what I mean? Point the finger at somebody else. It's not our fault. We just reported on what they told us. But would you do that with Uncle Trump, though? No. We all know the answer. See, and that's my problem. I wouldn't have an issue if it was the same for both sides, but we both know that's not the case. Because whenever the Trump administration comes out and says something, oh, no, we got to fact check that. Did you ever fact check the Biden administration? I'm just asking. Because according to Chuck Todd, it's Democrats' fault. It's Democrat politicians' fault. No, there's no blame on mainstream media. I'd argue that all of the blame is on mainstream media. All of it. Because if mainstream media had done their job and reported facts as they say that they do, which we know that they don't, and that's why they don't have the power or the pull that they once had. If they were reporting the facts, the Biden administration would have been forced to tell the truth. They would have been forced to. If you got all of mainstream media airing and covering this feeble man stumbling over sandbags, wandering off like a lost puppy, being guided off the stage by Obama, and they're talking about how this man can't even read a teleprompter, end of quote, repeat the line. If they're all talking about this, the Biden administration can't hide anymore. They can't hide. There's nothing to hide behind. Mainstream media basically is the White House's megaphone. At least for the most part, until you got Uncle Trump. Now, he's his own megaphone. He does his own thing, right? He's an anomaly, though. So if they had done their job, Democrats wouldn't have been able to hide. But don't take it from me.
I think what happened here is a couple things. So, number one, people say to me all the time, of course it was a cover-up by the media. Just look at Joe Biden. Of course he was out of it. And to that I would say, there is and there should be a much higher bar for a media outlet or a reporter to say that Joe Biden is clearly mentally slower or incapacitated than it is for someone to just say, he has dementia, he has Parkinson's. You can say that, but for the media to report that, it's a very high bar. And I don't think that bar was met.
Was that bar high? You guys remember when Uncle Trump walked down the metal ramp really slowly after it had rained and he had on his church shoes and whatnot? And mainstream media went in an uproar. Oh my goodness, something's wrong with Donald Trump's health. He needs to resign immediately. But in reality, he was just walking down it slow so he didn't slip and fall. It was a metal ramp that was wet. You guys remember that? This stuff is just absolutely ridiculous, man. These folks, like, nothing is their fault, I guess, when in reality, it's all their fault. Every bit of it. Every freaking bit of it.
Parkinson's. You can say that, but for the media to report that, it's a very high bar. And I don't think that bar was met. So yes, when I watched Joe Biden, the eye test made me think, as I watched him, man, he has really slowed down. And I'm not sure he should run for a second term. It did not make me think, man, he definitely, something is really wrong with him, and I'm going to cover it up so that he can win. No, absolutely.
Really? Nothing made you say, yeah, there's something seriously wrong with this guy. When this guy couldn't even really read a teleprompter correctly? End of quote, repeat the line? What? When he had to have note cards to talk to the press? To tell him who to call on? That didn't give you a cause to pause? He's wandering off like a lost puppy being guided by other world leaders on where to stand and where to go? That didn't give you a cause to pause? Really? You see how BS this stuff is? How bogus this is? Or you guys remember Jake Tapper had Laura Trump on and he went on this rant about how she was making fun, or he tried to pull people's heartstrings. He said, "How do you think kids feel? How do you think kids with the stutter would feel that you're making fun of Joe Biden with the stutter?" Like, what? Jake Tapper went on national television and did that, knowing good and darn well she wasn't making fun of people in mass with the stutter. She was talking about Joe Biden stumbling over his words. But he turned it into, oh, how do you think kids who stutter would feel about you making fun of them? Really? Mainstream media, y'all carried the Democrat Party's water, and y'all paying for it now, and I absolutely love that y'all having to pay for it. And I hope all of these media organizations completely crumble, fall to the ground.
Absolutely not. But I will also add this. That does not, the fact that I do not believe there was any coordinated cover-up by the media of Joe Biden's condition, that does not get us media off the hook, and here's why. I made a video about this before. You can look at it. It's called My Apology for my Joe Biden coverage. The media should have asked more questions about Joe Biden. I should have asked more questions about Joe Biden and his health. We should have dug harder. Because the eye test was what it was, and he looked old and frail, and when he was in public, he would sometimes lose his train of thought, we should have done more reporting. Now, people did. Alex Thompson at Axios did some. The Wall Street Journal political staff did some. People here and there wrote consistently and clearly that maybe he's too old. I tried to talk about his age fairly frequently, but I should have talked about it more, and I should have asked more questions. And then you get to the why of that. Why didn't you ask more questions? And I'm not speaking for all of the media, because all the media is a vast thing. But here's what I would say. Any study that you ever see about who reporters vote for, they vote for Democrats much more than Republicans. And I think what was going on here is I think it was an inherent and sort of unconscious bias more than a conscious bias. But I think the reporters covering this White House were too willing to take the Biden team's word for it. Anytime you asked about Joe Biden, they would say, I mean, he's 80, moves a little bit more stiffly than he did before, but man, he is totally with it. He outworks our 20-something staffers. And I think reporters were too willing to just say, okay, that makes sense. They were too credulous. They didn't ask enough questions. Their skepticism meter was not turned up high enough. And I think that had it been a Republican in that office, particularly if that Republican had been Donald Trump, there would have been less credulity. There would have been less willingness to just go along with what the Trump White House was saying. Like, oh, he's fine. You don't see him in his great times. He's amazing. I think there would have been more hard questions asked. And I think there should have been more hard questions asked by the media of Joe Biden and Joe Biden's staff about his health.
He's in part right there. But I don't for a second believe that these folks truly believed what the White House was saying. Not even for a second. We know that there's behind the scenes conversations with folks, right, that have sat down with Joe Biden, that have met him face to face and saw how feeble that man was. We know this. As a matter of fact, I can't think of the guy's name. Oh crap. He did an interview with Joe Biden. He was like mortified by what he saw, but never talked about it. Didn't go live on air and said, "Hey, yep, this guy's cooked," which he was. He was. So no, I'm not giving these guys any type of credit. Well, they just didn't ask enough questions. First off, which he admitted, they'll ask all types of questions of the Trump administration. As a matter of fact, every time the Trump administration makes a statement, oh, let's fact check that. Let's fact check this. Let's fact check that. No fact checking for the Biden administration? That's being done intentionally. That's not just, oh, well, we're just going to take them for their word. We love these folks. Like, no. Well, you do love them, but you also wanted to cover for them. You actively covered for them. And I go back to the famous example because everybody remembers it, the Joe Scarborough clip. And F you if you don't believe this is the best version of Joe Biden. Y'all weren't just not asking questions. You were actively covering for this man in the Democrat Party, trying to get them to win. And now that mainstream media sees it doesn't have the pull that they once had, and people in mass are moving away from mainstream media, especially the younger folks, the younger generation that are coming in, right? The only people that are really watching mainstream media are the older generation. And I don't mean to be a doom and gloom kind of guy, but if you're not bringing in new customers and your current customers are older, What do you think is going to happen to your organization? You know, I'm not wishing death upon anybody. I wish we could all live 1,000 years, but the reality of the situation is one day it's going to happen. And the older you get, the more likely that's going to happen. The closer you're getting to when it's time to return home. So if you're not bringing in new people and all of your current people are returning home, you're cooked. You're cooked. So now they're trying to come out and save face, and I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Not even a little bit. These folks will not be let off the hook. We ain't going to let them off the hook at all. They deserve every bit of decline that is coming their way, in my humble opinion. But what do you think, man? Let me know how y'all feel about mainstream media. Talk to me. Thanks for tuning in as always. Peace and love. I'm out.